Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Screen Time Continuum. I am Nick, and I am joined, as always, by Keelan. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, blessed in yourself.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we are back on our regular Wednesday evening for you guys, and we had said in our last episode of the Screen Time Continuum when we covered Mars Attacks that we were going to do Jack Nicholson. But we had a change of heart, and still keeping in the theme of Mars Attacks and another person in the roster of that movie, we decided to follow the wormhole with Natalie Portman. And it led us to the 2005 smash hit V for Vendetta. This movie was directed by James McTeague, and the writers were Lily Wachowski and Lana Wachowski. And it stars Hugo Weaving, Natalie Portman, and Rupert Graves. And this is a movie that I'm pretty familiar with. I think a lot of our listeners will be familiar with. And I think before we just went live, we were just mentioning that watching it after spending 2020 the way we did, it's definitely a little bit different, and some of the themes hit a little bit too close to home sometimes. But before we start getting into the whole thing, Keelan, what were your initial thoughts? What do you want to say on the top of this?
Oh man. First, I've always loved this movie. I am going to continue to love this movie. I actually know people who don't like this movie, and we're still friends because I am that respectful of people's opinion. But overall, I'll start with some of the things that I didn't know about the movie, and I discovered. I have this knack for wanting to research little things when I'm getting into things that I get to talk about later. And it was weird knowing that the Wachowskis wrote this. I didn't realize that when I was younger and I saw it. I didn't realize the director, I forget his name right now. You just said it too. James
Teague, I believe. Let me just
McTeague.
James McTeague.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he also directed The Matrix.
Oh, okay.
Amongst many other things, but and then keeping in mind that everybody knows Natalie Portman, but Hugo Weaving is V, and Hugo Weaving was also Agent Smith. So it was like I put all of that together, and then I reflected on watching the movie before, and then I watched it again this time around, and I must say I wouldn't say it was a different movie, but as you said, the things from this year that just passed 2020, and just having a different understanding as an adult as well. This was definitely a different movie in 2021 than it was in 2005.
Oh yeah,
in a good way. In a good way, more in a way that almost so where it probably prepared us for things that we didn't realize we were already prepared for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess prepared us, but also kind of like, I was thinking about this today, and I will do my best to not be very political when we're considering this movie or talking about this movie.
That's actually in my notes. Don't be political.
Right. I know there's so many political sort of themes to it, but I was thinking, it's interesting how we're comfortable with looking at themes and sort of motifs through movie and TV, and it almost gives us a false sense of security that because it's on a movie or TV that that's a part of the fantasy world, and it almost gives us like a little barrier we put up for ourselves. So when things that are along the same path of the things that we see on movie and TVs happen, we almost kind of they don't hit the same way, right? Because we've seen them on movies and TV before. And I just think it's interesting because I was thinking about this, just the theme of this whole movie and just kind of like how it parallels very much what we were going through in the last year. Not to the extent of being like that crazy, but certain themes were pretty close. But it is interesting to me to think like, it's weird that when we see things happen in fiction, we kind of don't believe them when they happen in real life.
I don't think we're afforded the luxury of separating reality from TV enough to understand when, or excuse me, reality from entertainment enough to understand when entertainment is giving us signs of reality that we should be paying
Mm.
attention to.
Hmm.
Like I think we'd have to first learn to separate them to then see how they are familiar.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. That's well said. It's something that I kind of think as well. But not to get too far ahead of ourselves because we still have the movie to kind of talk about. And I'm sure these themes will pop up again because they're central to this movie. But Keelan, did you want to start us off? Did you have any points where you wanted to bring up first?
Um, I will the one point I will make, and I think everything else pretty much will fall in line as we go through the story. The one point I wanted to make is the note that everything that's happening in this movie didn't happen. And you know, remembering this movie takes place in London.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that's happening in London is a result of what began, according to the storyline, in the United States of America.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And out that just that part alone, um, understanding that how a world war works and how a world war begins, and seeing the effects not from the epicenter, which would be America, according to the storyline,
Mm-hmm.
but seeing what another faction is going through, what another country is going through, and how it affected them as well.
Right. As a
So
result, almost. Yeah.
yeah, that
So
was a huge point for me.
yeah, so let's paint the picture for our audience. In the setting in which this movie takes place is mainly focused in London,
Mhm.
in the UK. In some undeterminable point in the future, I don't know if they give you a solid date, right?
So there's a couple. So again, in my research, there were a couple of references. So some
Mm,
references make it seem as if it could be around 2020.
mhm,
Some references make it seem as it could be 2027. My math. So I'll take you guys through my timeline really quick, and I don't think this affects the story at all. You go 2005 is when this movie comes out, right?
mhm,
So it would be a timepiece. Either we can look at it as it's telling the future or it's telling the past. So now you go from when the movie comes out and you jump into the storyline. The beginning of the story doesn't exactly say anything about the story. The one thing you have from the beginning of the story, and we'll get to this later, the story that's being told, about how everything began. There is a reference to someone's beginning a career in 2015, which presumably is before everything else began, before the World War and
mhm,
all of those other things.
mhm.
If you think from there, we can ballpark say 4 or 5 years. So it all began around 2020. So we'd
Got
probably
it.
be around 2030, 2035.
Okay. Yeah, so we're
That's
in
my
the
timeline.
Yeah, we're in the I know that 2020 was a part of it, I believe, and I don't know whether that's when the virus started or
Right.
something else happened. But so we're in the future in London, and it's a sort of dystopian Big Brother-esque style London where there's curfews and loudspeakers on every street that tell you you have to stay off the streets after a certain point. It seems as though England has been taken over by ultra conservative religious wing,
Mhm.
um, in which things that are considered debaucherous would be outlawed. And you can you can use your imagination on what would be considered debauchery, and you can see how
Let,
quickly
let,
that
let's not
envelops everything else too.
let's not leave it to their imagination. Let's help them out a little bit. Here are
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that are considered debauchery:
Mm-hmm.
religious text, any form of art,
Mm-hmm.
music, books, thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and then
Oh, and
uh,
weapons, and weapons.
and weapons, and but it started off, like, and this is kind of like they tell this story, kind of in the middle of the movie, but it started off with a more familiar religious zealotry that we've seen
Mhm.
before, and the persecution of people who are homosexual or
Muslims.
considered, yeah, Muslims or
Mhm.
other religions. So it started off as this sort of like ultra
Familiar.
right, sort of like I guess Christian, but I don't know if they're exactly Christian. I think it's interesting that the symbol of the government is a double cross,
Yeah,
uh,
I thought
which
so.
is a little on the nose, but also kind of clever. But yeah, so basically London has been taken over by this sect, and it's an authoritarian state in which they have a chancellor, and everything is approved and everything is censored, and so yeah, that's kind of like where we start off in the story, and then
Right.
we get introduced to the two main characters, who would be V, the man in the Guy Fawkes mask, and Evie, who is Natalie Portman.
Right. And now I'll say this from the beginning. What I really liked about the way their characters come into play. So we open with them showing the scene. Now, if I'll be a little clear, the first scene is a little confusing because it makes you think that the times that all of this began back in, like, say, the Western days. But
Mm,
I think it's important to note to anyone who watches this movie, I think the concept there is that the gallows, people being hung in front of crowds, that was still a familiar thing in modern times. I think that's what they were trying to portray at that time. Like, things were getting that bad that they were still hanging people
right.
in a town square in
Well, and it
modern
was
time.
right, and it was a direct reference to the gunpowder plot of 1605,
Right.
in which a man named Guy Fawkes attempted to blow up Parliament, and that's where you get the mask. So
Mhm.
they actually in Britain they have, I think they call it Guy Fawkes Day,
Oh.
and they burn an effigy of Guy Fawkes, and yeah, so it's actually kind of like a semi holiday in England,
Oh,
where
whoa.
they remember this guy that tried to blow up Parliament.
How did that not come up in my research? Come
Yeah, it's
on, Google, you got to do better.
right, right, yeah. But yeah, so they kind of start off with the Guy Fawkes storyline of him, trying to blow up Parliament, and then he gets executed in the public square, like Keelan said.
Mhm.
And that sort of like state, sponsored violence that
Correct.
keeps the masses in line is
Correct.
kind of a parallel to this authoritarian government that's currently running England.
Right. And what I thought was so important about that, I'm actually with you bringing it up. And again, me not realizing what you said, how that is really reference to truth that
Hmm.
I was not aware of. Um, I think it's important also to note, and there's a lot of quotes through this that I just took you know, uh, a liking to. However, if you've watched our show and if you keep up with us, you're aware we'll go over some of those things. Um, what I liked about that was when Lady goes, "It is the man I remember and not the date," even though the theme of the movie is the statement, remember the 5th of November,
Hmm.
which is the date that Guy Fawkes did that, and
Hmm.
everything else ensues after. It's the fact that the moment when you think of who's telling this story, right? Like, is
Hmm.
it his wife? Is it his protege? Is it just someone in the square who was aware of this person who stood up against uh the unsightly? You know, that was interesting to me, just as the quote, but it's still, again, me not knowing that it was a reference to something in reality.
Hmm.
It was just like, oh man, they're really setting the tone. That's how I was looking at it.
Yeah.
Um, and what I want to add is from there, I'm going to move forward from there, just that moment, and then to introducing the character Evie and her just being posed at this really meek, soft spoken, so to speak, but really sure of herself kind of girl. Almost as if they're trying to push her out there as she may be a little promiscuous, like a rebel, so to speak, not necessarily, you know, uh, a woman of the night, but just someone who is like, oh, that's what you want me to do. Like, I don't care.
Hmm.
Um, I really liked that, and again, the way they introduced the two. So the way they introduced the two, Evie's walking through the town. She's headed out to a dinner with. We find out later is a friend of hers, but also her boss at her job,
Hmm.
and she's accosted by the Fingermen.
Yeah.
Now, the Fingermen are private police. And if we know, like, let's just be honest, we live in America. We specifically live in California. We don't have to talk about private police.
Hmm.
People with power abuse their power when they are allowed to.
Right.
these fingermen, the private police in the movie, they abuse their power so much so that they literally are going out in the night to catch and rape women.
Right. Who break the curfew.
Right, who break the curfew. And that is their way of issuing judicial punishment for them breaking curfew. Luckily for our character Evie, in steps V, who, listen, the guy steps in like the smoothest dirt devil in the world.
Yeah.
But two things before he steps in. I didn't understand, was he just sitting a watch, or was he like waiting for the perfect moment to interject into Evie's life? What did you
Yeah.
think about that?
Yeah, I don't know because so when she walks out of like the building and onto the street, you can see him pass by behind her.
Right.
And so it makes it seem like he's been following her, at least kind of keeping tabs on her. We don't really know why. There's really no indication except for, you know, her scoffing at the TV screen that like she's into any sort of you know, rebellious acts.
Right.
So it could have been a right place, right time sort of thing. Perhaps he was just on his way to go do his thing and he happened to see her, you know, alone.
Right. But see, when I see coincidence written into a script, I usually call bullshit.
Yeah, well, because it makes it really hard to kind of believe. You know,
Right.
coincidences definitely happen, but when it becomes a thing where it's like, oh yeah, you also just happen to be the perfect person to help me carry out a terrorist
That,
act.
and that's why I call bullshit on
Yeah,
coincidence in a script. Like just
right,
write it in as he was a creepy stalker and then she moved past it later. I'm
right,
fine with that.
right.
Um so yeah, so he jumps in, he moves in, and the very first thing he says is the multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him.
Hmm.
That is to me, you know, just myself. I'm sitting there, I'm like, what?
Oh
But
yeah, yeah. V's the kind of guy that you could tell read the thesaurus as a kid, and just like you know was was really annoying with just being
for
really you
sure.
know being really verbose.
But can I be honest?
Yeah.
I was the kid that wanted to be that.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, like it's nice to have a large vocabulary, but it is a
Yeah.
little funny that he's like beating the hell out of like four guys and you know going on this soliloquy that has a whole bunch of V's in it.
Oh, we're getting there. Oh, we
Yeah.
are getting there. Well, okay. So, and what I love about this is their introduction, guys. This is Evie and V's introduction. So, Evie has officially been saved from the dirty fingerman.
Mhm.
Um, just understand that fingerman is a running joke, but it's still what they're called in this movie. And she gets a front row seat to V, who is seemingly superhuman. Again, at this point in the movie, we don't know who he is, we don't know where he's come from or why he's here.
But he certainly has a terrible haircut.
He has a terrible wig.
Yeah, it is a bit.
And
I guess it is a wig, but man, that is just like the worst, most unfortunate wig you could ever buy.
that wig makes him look like the principal from Matilda. And not
Yeah,
like because that's what her hair actually looked like, but it gives him that vibe,
right,
you
right.
know. Um, but so you know, he jumps in. The multiple villainies of nature do swarm upon him. I'm gonna say that like probably one more time because that was the multiple villainies of nature do swarm upon him. What is this guy?
Yeah.
um, and so the first scene with his superhuman abilities, I think that is the first introduction for us, not necessarily for Evie, but for us to understand that we are not rooting for the forces of nature here. We're rooting for something that is supernatural. It's preparing us for everything that is to come after and the things that we find out. And what I like about that is it is very, I didn't think about this until I was going over my notes. And had I thought about it earlier, I would have researched to find out when did it's not called Glass, Unbreakable. When did that come out?
Oh, I
Do you
have no
remember? Was
clue.
that was like around 06, 04-ish, huh?
Yeah, probably something like that.
Okay. Because you know, a lot of this is the time where a lot of directors and writers were remaking comic books. V for Vendetta was a comic book.
Mhm.
And it gave me that throw, that it gave me that notion right then and there, like that. Okay, wait. So is he human? Is he not human? What is he? What are we gonna find out about him? How far are we gonna go on this journey? And that
Then
was
you
the
find
beginning.
out basically he's just Deadpool.
You're giving it away too early.
Sorry.
But he's the bad Deadpool. Let's be. It's not. He's not
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the
He's
funny
not
Ryan
as
Reynolds Deadpool.
yeah, he's not as good as Deadpool for sure.
He's what was that, X-Men First Class Deadpool?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Without all the crazy powers.
For sure. And so right after that, the fight ends. He has maliciously abused the attackers. Somewhat a little, in my opinion, he might have gone a little bit too far, but what is too far for justice?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, that is kind of like the motif of one of the through lines of this movie is like,
Right.
okay, well, how many people are you willing to kill for your sort of like liberation, quote unquote? Because we'll get into the idea of whether they're really liberated after this or not. But
Correct.
yeah,
Now, the net from there we jump, and if I'm being honest, guys, it's very meticulous at the beginning, and then it gets to a smooth story. Um, and so Evie asked initially, "Who are you?" And he kind of just makes jest of it, like, "I'm the man in the mask." Like, do you
yeah,
understand the point of me wearing a mask?
yeah.
He
The
doesn't say.
paradox of asking a masked man who he is. Yeah,
It's like, who are you? But from there, he goes on this tangent. And if I must say, if I am an actor going on an audition and I have to do a monologue, it is either this or it is the scene from American Beauty where he is in his office.
yeah.
Like those
No,
are
this is a good one.
two powerful scenes. Mind you, I've never seen American Beauty, but I had to perform that monologue I think twice. And
Yeah.
man, it sits with me till this day. This is another one of them. Um, Forgive me, but I am going to do this, guys, and forgive me, Nick, my co-host, because I'm sure I will make a few mistakes as I do it. But I'm gonna read the continuous V verse, as I like to call it.
Okay.
Now it is voila, in view, a human vaudevillain veteran cast vicariously as both victim and villain by the vicissitudes of fate. This visage, no mere veneer of vanity, is a vestige of the vox populi, now vacant, vanished. However, this valorous visitation of a bygone vexation stands vixified, as has vowed to vanquish these venal and virulent vermin, vanguarding vice and vouchsafing the violently vicious and voracious violation of volition. The only verdict is vengeance, a vendetta held as a volatile, not in vain, held as a votive, not in vain, for the valve and veracity of such shall one day vindicate the vigilant and the virtuous. Verily, sorry guys, verily, the viciose of verbiage, vers most verbose. So let me simply add, it is my very good honor to meet you, and you may call me V.
Mm.
I want to know how many times he had to shoot that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he probably didn't have to shoot it. He probably voice recorded it.
Ah, don't rob me of my
Yeah.
glory.
Because he doesn't have to do too much, like face acting in that
That's true.
mask.
That
So
is very, very true.
yeah.
And that would be the stumble, is what do I
Mm.
look like on camera making these
Oh yeah, all those
wow.
words. Yeah, it would look a little silly.
I would think it would look like Agent Smith in the Rain.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, yeah.
So from there we move out after he finishes this wonderful spiel that, in my opinion, captivates the entire audience. After that, if you're not into this movie and you're not prepared for everything that's coming after, just turn it off. I'm not going to hold you. I'm not going to make you feel any way about it or hold you guilty. If you hear that monologue in this movie from the actor Hugo Weaving and you do not want to finish this movie, it's fine. We won't judge you. So from there we move, or before I move, what do you think of that, Nick? How did you feel the first time you heard that? The first time?
Well, it's definitely entertaining. It's a very to steal a V word, very verbose way of
Contagious, isn't it?
yeah. A very verbose way of utilizing your vernacular, I suppose. But um, it's like I try to make sense of it, and it all makes sense. Like the what he's saying is all like real words, and it makes and like coherent sentences.
Correct.
But it's also kind of like, oh, you're just flexing in front of Natalie
Oh
Portman,
yeah,
man.
for sure.
You wouldn't
For
do
sure.
that to just some dude, like if it was
Well,
just some guy that was like, getting
Hugo
accosted,
Weaving, he might do it for Hugh Jackman. Who knows?
maybe, but like he's just trying to be, cute in front of Natalie Portman.
No, I totally agree. There were a few moments in this movie where you could see him smiling through that mask. Like he was absolutely enjoying being the character. But
Mm,
I agree that there were probably moments where it was like, "Hey, I'm shooting this with Natalie Portman." But then
mhm.
again, he was and so many other things. For those who aren't familiar, just look up Hugo Weaving, dude. Like
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have to
he
work
might have been a
after the
bigger star than her
Matrix.
at that point.
He didn't have to work after the Matrix and Lord of the Rings. Basically,
Right.
he could have retired.
But I'm saying I would say that by V for Vendetta, he might have been a bigger star at that very time than she was, like momentarily.
That's tough, man. She had lots of
Very
stuff.
tough.
Yeah.
Very tough. She was a child actor. It's very tough.
Yeah.
Um, but so after that wonderful spiel, they get to know each other. They introduce each other. They then part ways. Or no, excuse me.
No,
They don't part ways.
he
Excuse me.
don't. He invites her to go see what he does.
Correct. He invites her to go on his night journey, so to speak, and play some music. The music he plays is considered terrorism as he explode. It's not the clock tower. What is the statue called? I don't remember.
Like it's basically like a liberty statue, like
Right,
a
because it's
woman
not a
holding
real
a
thing.
sword and scales.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be the London Statue of Liberty, so to speak, and he destroys it, makes a speech to the public, basically destroys it, and then goes on about his night. There's a huge uproar, and they're trying to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, at first I was thinking like this was a few days later, and then I realized no, this is the exact next morning,
Mm-hmm.
where we get to the news station, and that's where we really realize through the news station and the way that's running and everything else that there is a full-scale government control going on, and
Right.
there's nothing happening unless the government says it. The
Right.
biggest key to that for me is when the producer of the station says, "We don't create the news, we just broadcast it. That's the government's job."
Yeah, right. Yeah, because basically what they do is that since that wasn't supposed to happen and V blew up, I think it was like the Hall of Justice or something like that.
Yeah,
Because
that sounds about right.
it's Lady Justice on with the scales and the sword. But yeah, so he blows that up, and then he pumps the 1812 overture by Tchaikovsky on the loudspeakers with fireworks and stuff, and everybody sees it. And so
Right.
the news the next day spins it as an impromptu controlled demolition that, basically was planned all along, but we just didn't tell you about it.
Right. Which I thought that was kind of brilliant.
Yeah, I mean,
It
of course.
reminded me of some factions I've heard of before,
Well, I mean, like it's a critique on the way that we kind of the way authoritarian systems use the media. That's what happens, is that the media becomes the mouth of the authoritarian system. So like the guy says, we don't create the news, or we don't rewrite the news. We leave that to the government. We just report it.
Right.
So yeah, you get a little bit of more of this sort of like foundation of this sort of authoritarian, what these people are having to go through, and what the public is being kept from, and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think before we really get into everything, because this is really when everything's going to take off. I think the easiest thing to figure by this point is no one is really happy, but everybody has accepted what's going on, and that to me is obvious long before V commits any of his acts,
I feel
including
kind
the
of
first night.
Yeah, I feel kind of like it would have been good to see more of the government tyranny, to be
I
honest.
agree. Yeah,
Because,
or at least a day or two before V introduces himself.
yeah, because a lot of it was like, okay, we're seeing these families watching TV, and it didn't seem like these people were miserable. At least from what I was seeing, like the one of
Mhm.
the families had a really nice house, and they were like just
Right, they were chilling.
watching. They're chilling. So I mean, like apparently there are people that are allowed to kind of like live good lives. So I would have liked to kind of see what. And and we see a little bit later, like what the government has done, with this sort of like virus thing that happened. But like it would have been good to see more of the authoritarian stuff happening, because I really wanted to have that sort of like, okay, the stakes are really high. These people really, really need to be liberated from their government, you know?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, we right before we discover that Evie works at the station and everything, which she does, we do jump to the government and we see that they have a huge, basically an NSA roundtable, so to speak. Um, and it's kind of sinister. It's very clear that this is Doctor Evil's lair,
Mm-hmm.
and
Well, the chancellor gets pumped through a giant television that they
right.
have to sit in front of and basically like, listen to him. It's very Big Brother, very 1984 George Orwell sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking of. Like, what is the date? That it seemed really dated, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Thank you. Um, what I thought was interesting about that, just the whole situation, it's very clear that no one in that room is on the same page as the chancellor. Again, they are seemingly like the civilians, just doing what they are told to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so as we move from there, we discover they already know who Evie is because they've seen her face on camera. They also know she was accosted by the Fingerman, which I think is initially why they are not gonna try to ask her any questions or anything, because it's like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what, we know what happened, so we're just gonna let it go
Right.
until a little later. But right after that, we jump to Evie at work, and she works in the mailroom at BTN, the British Television Network, which is the largest television network and or seemingly the only television network in all of London.
Right.
Um, and that's where everything kind of goes a little crazy. Note that what the government realized about Evie, and when they weren't sure if she was with him with V at that point or not, simply because they discovered that she was in a juvenile reclamation project due to her parents were also activists,
Mm-hmm.
and they both died due to being activists, and her brother was also a victim of one of the massacres that occurred under the virus and things that we'll discuss a little later in the movie. Excuse me. So what I thought was crazy about that was, so we already know how involved her family was, but she seemingly just wants nothing to do with this, and that takes me back to my question: like, was V aware of this beforehand?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to get into a lot of questions about what V was doing this whole time, because there's another huge chunk of the movie in which I'm like, okay, once that part ends, I'm like, okay, so that was V the whole time who did that?
Right. I
So
know
I mean,
exactly.
like, yeah. So I mean, it is quite possible that he was trying to vet for having some sort of accomplice. Though they don't really talk about it in that way, it just kind of becomes happenstance. And you even have like quotes from V in which, later in the movie he's talking to somebody, he says there are no coincidences.
Right.
And so I think that there's a little bit of like they're playing with this theme of divine providence, of this like destiny, fate sort of thing that brought them together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't buy it.
No, I mean, like they don't do it well enough for it to be like impactful, to be honest. Like it doesn't seem like, that makes a whole lot of sense. So
Right. You know, them meetings. I'm sorry, them meeting seems more black book like redacted file stuff to me than
right. Yeah.
than a coincidence. Um,
Well, and then why does he go like so yeah, so he goes to the broadcasting station.
right. So you're right. So he's at the broadcasting station. He's holding the producers and them in the control room hostage at this point. Evie doesn't know. She's just simply doing her job, delivering the mail to different studios in the network.
Mm-hmm.
Come to find out, she is literally delivering the Foxine mass.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, so the very first time, this is the first time that we are introduced into the mask being distributed. And the first thing for me was I didn't get it. It was like, okay, why would he do that?
Yeah.
Now we fast forward through that whole thing going down. He makes a statement that is broadcast to all of London about his plans, what he feels, what has happened in the past politically,
Mm-hmm.
and how he plans to take a stand against it. And he encourages the general public to follow him through this journey, and they have a year to make their decision.
Right. So on the 5th of November of the next year, everybody is supposed to meet at like Parliament or something like that, you know.
Right. And he also makes sure to remind the general public that they're not comfortable with the fact that the government has bought their solace, so to speak, with the lie of comfort and promises that really just turned into dominance, you know?
Yeah, well, he says that basically, like, if you're wondering, you know, who's to blame for all of this authoritarianism, look in the mirror. It's your acceptance of all of this that is kept, you know, kept it in perpetuity, is, and which is true. And you know, like that's kind of like the scary thing about authoritarianism is that usually it's not this thing that we think of in our head where it's like, you know, oh, the bad guy's here and we have to fight him off. Usually authoritarianism comes under the guise of what's popular and what
Right.
people want, and they cheer for it, you know. And so like that's kind of an interesting, you know, sort of idea, I guess, because you know he's right, they were complicit in this whole thing, and what he says is that they traded their freedoms for security, and they, you know, allowed fear to be their you know, their mode of decision making.
Right. And well, and side note to reality, it's interesting how the way that all went down and the way that all explains reminds me personally of three uh presidencies that I can think of off the top of head. Two of them are not in this country, one is in this country. Hitler, who won his election by less than, I believe it was less than 400 votes. Um, Trump, who won his election by, I believe it was less than, what was that, like less than 2,000 votes or something like that?
Oh, I against Hillary? I don't know.
Yeah,
Honestly.
the first time.
Yeah, I have no clue.
And then you have in Uganda today, present day, because we know Trump's out of office as of today, actually. But in present day as well, in Uganda, you have Museveni and uh, wow, I can't remember it right now. I have to, I have to. But the Ugandan elections out there, there are some Bobby Wine, excuse me, Bobby Wine, and apparently, you know, that's an election that is right now being uh, scrutinized due to they are not sure. You know, some people believe that it was rigged or that it was messed with in the same way they believe our previous elections were messed with, in the same way they believe that the back to V for Vendetta, in the same way they believe that in V for Vendetta, it was a regime that kind of manhandled their or strong armed their way into power.
But they,
And
but the I mean, I think the main thing is that they coast off of popularity. So like none of these people, and it's really uncomfortable to say, but you know, I will say it, Hitler was not unpopular.
well, and that,
He
yeah,
was a
that's kind of what I'm
popular
getting at as well.
person. Yeah. So it's like, so what happens is like there's a crisis, and the populace of this of us, any country really, because it's like it's just kind of like a way that we operate in societies. You know, a country faces a crisis, there's a cry for attention and remediation of the crisis, and if the government that is currently in charge cannot fix that crisis, somebody will pop up and become a figurehead promising the change that the people ask for.
Exactly.
And that's kind of just a telltale sign of basically all civilization, really. Like I don't, yeah, which is something that we have to be careful about, because obviously like that can lead to really bad stuff.
Right. Right. And so I had to mention that just because it's interesting. That jumped out to me that moment when they were explaining all of that. I'm like, and
Mhm.
even later when it got deeper into explaining it, I was like, whoa,
Oh
that
yeah,
shit makes so
yeah.
much sense. So, excuse me. From there, they have the police basically lock down the building and they're in search of V because it's clear he's in the building. That's the only way that this video could have been transmitted out from
Mhm.
inside that particular building in one particular room. He, however, has already thought of an exit plan, hence the excess of masks that were delivered to the studio.
Mhm.
So he takes all those masks, dresses up everybody the way he needs them to, so that he can move about while the police are basically shooting civilians. That I thought that was a little crazy. Like, yo, you really just left them out there to get popped.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, luckily, they didn't go in there American style, and they only said, "Hey, 2 bullets is enough." Hey, okay, maybe we're not gonna keep going. All right, we good. Search them, but I thought it was very interesting how from there he slips out the back, but then he still gets caught immediately. Like there was no, it was almost like in his mind, it's this moment where divine intervention, like you were saying a moment ago, like there were a couple of moments in the movie where it was like divine intervention had to come into play. How do you plan all of this and you didn't get a better exit plan to where the dude is literally standing there when you walk out the door?
Well, yeah, so the inspector stops them, right?
It wasn't the inspector, it was another officer. It was
Oh,
like one of the guys the inspector sent over there. It wasn't the inspector himself because they
oh,
didn't knock the inspector out. They knocked the other guy out.
right, okay. Yeah, I mean, well, as I said, right place, right time. They're trying to play on this sort of like EV and V were meant to, you know, conspire together and like be working together. Again, I don't really I mean, like it makes sense if, she happens to just work at the only television broadcasting studio there is. Then okay, yeah, I get it. You need to use that broadcasting
But
station to
she had nothing to
get
do
your
with
message out.
broadcasting.
Yeah, I know, but
She
she
worked in the
still worked in the
mail.
building. I mean, like,
Oh, you're right.
I don't necessarily think that like that's important to him, but the concept that, like she would save him at the end isn't that far fetched because they already
Yes.
have interactions with each other.
Yes.
So, like I get it. I mean, I have to suspend disbelief, a little bit because it
Is it
doesn't make
fair to
a whole
say there's
ton
a
of
little
sense.
more mystery to this than there was the Matrix?
Well, I mean, yeah, but not in a good way. I mean, yeah, basically, I think you mean plot holes. Yes, there are plot holes.
Oh, hey.
You're gonna get to the biggest plot hole soon. So,
Oh, yeah, very true. So from there, Evie is knocked out by the inspector's deputy, whomever, and he is then knocked out by V. V has a conflict in his mental state, and he then takes Evie with him. That is seen on camera by the inspector. And we flash forward to Evie then waking up in V's home,
mhm,
where he has just an assortment. He basically lives in an underground castle.
yeah,
And
and he collects all the censored things.
excuse me?
He collects all the things that have been censored by the
Correct.
government. Yeah.
Correct. And so he has a vault, or he basically lives in a vault that is full of the possessions from the vault of the ministries of objectionable materials, which we covered a little earlier, those materials that are forbidden.
Mhm.
Um,
Which
Now,
are, like a jukebox and, a case of butterflies and
right,
books and music.
some
Yeah.
really simple stuff, but
Oh yeah, well, but
I
that's
get
the way it always goes because in real life that did happen.
it. Mhm.
Like we did burn, societies burn books,
Yes,
societies burnt music,
yes,
so like it does happen for sure.
right. And if I'm being fair, over the last 20 years, we have seen a large chunk of shows and movies that travel that lore.
Mhm.
Um, so when she wakes up and he's telling her about all of these things, and she asks him like, "Oh, you stole them," and it's just like she frowns upon him stealing until he's cooking breakfast and he has real butter, and then all of a sudden, "Oh, I thought about my mistakes and what I
Yeah.
said, and I apologize." And is that real butter? No, I'm joking. It didn't go that way, guys. But essentially, that's how I took it because if you're okay, it's similar to a little bit later. She has this conflict of right and wrong, but when certain things were done to protect her, she had no problem with it. There was no questions. And that's how I kind of took this situation as well. Like, oh, you're cool with the butter, but you feel like maybe he shouldn't have taken the statues and the paintings as well, right? But but
Yeah.
but you like real butter, so hey, I'm fine with that. If I'm being Irish, honest, guys, if you've ever had Irish butter, I like Irish butter, but if I'm on a budget, I'm still gonna get Imperial, and I'm not gonna complain.
Amish butter is the best.
you know, like there's some there. We get it, guys. There's quality out there, but either you're okay with how it comes about, or you're not. That's just how I look at it. You'll never catch me eating lard because I don't like the way lard is. It's not my thing. Anyway,
Mm.
so from there, I really thought it was interesting because that's when we get into, in my opinion, uh these explaining himself, explaining who he is, what his character is about, what his purpose is, why he believes what he believes, the things that have set into motion, uh why he is willing to put his life in the situation it is. One of the things he says for me that proves that is people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. Now, the only reason that would be important to a person of his nature is you feel slighted by your government.
Mm-hmm.
You feel that they no longer understand who the boss is. It reminds me of something that happened about 2 weeks ago in our nation's capital. And there are people who just, hey, I'm your boss. That's not really how this works, buddy. But okay. And that's what it
Mm.
reminded me of, but not in a bad way, because there should be a level of understanding between the government and its citizens. What is of the citizens' control? There should be things, not just potholes and stop signs. We should be able to make decisions in our communities. And there should be things where, hey, there's a board of like 18 people who are well versed in law or something that is pertaining to that situation. And homeowners maybe don't have the tactical understanding to help with that situation. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't
Kind of
expect them to knock and ask my grandma to find out how to get the gangs to stop shooting each other.
right.
But
Yeah,
I do
kind of.
expect them to ask us if we want a movie theater before they put that thing in our neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking just a moment ago about the man, I wish I would remember what movie or TV show this is from, but there's like a metaphor about how they get elephants to stay in one spot, and it's like they start them off as baby elephants, and they basically tie their leg to a piece of rope, and then put the piece of rope to a stake, and the stake is strong enough so that the elephant can't move.
Wow.
And throughout their entire lives, they grow up, and these giant elephants, now that they're you know 15 times the size they were when they were babies, they could easily rip the stake out of the ground, but
They have
they
no will
still
to.
think that they can't. So
Wow.
it's that same sort of like parallel with the government and the way the government kind of treats people, especially in this movie, where it's like the government is exercising so much authority because the reality is that they are actually the more powerless ones, and they're keeping this illusion of the stake in the ground for all of the people, when the people need to realize all they have to do is pull the stake out of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that to me, that's just simply very true to most societies today. That is
Mm-hmm.
how most of us are living, including us as we're talking about it.
Yeah, I mean it's no society is impervious to collapse and decay and
Correct.
corruption. Like every society that can happen to, and we have to be like cognizant of it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, for sure.
So from there, what do you think at that point?
Well, so then, like basically him and Evie are having breakfast, and this is kind of like a lull in the movie, in my opinion, but because I what the heck else happens? So um basically Evie wakes up at his house. She realizes that he has burns all over his body like Deadpool. They have breakfast. And then V goes, and then they cut to a different scene where like V goes to the broadcaster, the guy that was basically spewing all the hateful rhetoric on TV in the first scene when we see V and Evie.
Right.
And so he's in his shower and he's listening to or watching one of his shows and kind of repeating it. And by the way, that shower is awesome.
Super awesome. Yeah.
Like
Okay.
one of the coolest showers I've ever seen in my entire life.
And that was 2005. I just want to
Yeah.
say that shower is so cool that now you can go down to like the little surplus stores off of Alameda and stuff, and you can find like a whole row of those for like $100. Back then, they were probably like 10 grand.
Oh yeah, yeah. Very cool.
I wouldn't trust them for $100 for record, but
oh yeah. Well, but yeah, so he's taking a shower and he's kind of watching his thing, and then V shows up and basically kills him. Right?
Yeah, so he's the voice of London, which is, and I consider him basically the biggest insider. He would be like a Phil Hannity?
Yeah,
or,
I mean,
one of the, I wouldn't even say Hannity's that bad, but
yeah,
one of those
I get what you
CNN,
mean.
Fox
Yeah.
News kind of, just incite the riot because it makes me money, not because I actually know or care what's going on.
Yeah. Like basically like yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, that sort of like propagandist salesman sort
and that's
of
why I
thing.
even think like it may be a little unfair to even try to name anybody, but I think everybody understands the type of character I'm discussing or we're discussing. And we discover then his name is not just Louis Prothero. His name is formerly Commander Louis Prothero, and he was a part of the program that essentially created V. I would liken his character that was described, the Odin style of his character, to like Ivan the Terrible. Like he seemed, his character seemed like he was that guy. Like he was the one who tortured everybody and did all the nasty, sinister things simply because he could, and nobody was gonna say anything.
Yeah, for sure.
But so immediately after that, he kills Prothero, and
then it cuts back to them in the house again.
Right, that would be the next morning, though, I'm guessing. So you have the morning of them having breakfast and discussing. You fast forward to the evening, not knowing what happened through the day. Yay. And then, and mind you, we're fast forwarding through an entire year, guys. Like everything that's happening. And I'll tell you guys when we get closer to the end of the year, but we're really going through an entire year. So we don't have an exact timeline for any of this. This could be 3-4 days apart. But the next thing we see is her again awakening in his home to the clanking of swords, where he is having sword play with an armored dummy he has in the middle of his living room while watching The Count of Monte Cristo, which he says is his favorite movie.
Yeah.
And after he discovers she hasn't seen the movie, they watch it, she enjoys it, they discuss it, and then the news comes on. And the news is announcing that they have discovered the body of one Louis Prothero. Do you know? Could you? What do you think of why did he try to turn it off? You think he tried to turn it off so she didn't know it happened, or just like, I don't like, I did that. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, just to not basically, because he's grooming her, so he doesn't want to give away all of his crazy. Just so, like, this is my issue with this movie is that this just Stockholm syndrome manifests. So, like, Natalie Portman, we'll get into what happens to her a little bit later, but like, so he's grooming her to be a terrorist, and like he doesn't want to go too fast, too quickly. So he's only seen, like she's only seen him kill people that were immediate dangers or immediate threats. She hasn't seen him kill politically per se yet. And that was a political kill, and basically one that was attached to his childhood or his creation.
Origin story.
Yeah. And so, Evie then basically tells him her childhood story of like, her parents becoming activists because her brother fell sick to the virus or something and died, right?
Right. So, essentially, yeah, that's when she discovers that he killed the guy, and what got me about her telling him the story, like she opens up to him, and it's not. I'm not sure if she told him the story to like kind of like become friends, or if she told him the story just thinking like this is what he wants to hear. Like
Yeah,
I'm
I don't
here,
know.
why not just be on, like just tell him who I am, right? Because again, it almost, I thought at that point he would say, "Hey, I know all of that already," but he didn't. But it seemed like he did know all of that already. It didn't seem like any of this was like this huge, "Oh my God, Evie, I can't believe, I'm so sorry, Evie." None of that. None of that. And so they basically just moved through that moment, um, with her coming to the conclusion of telling him, "I'll repay you in any way. But I just, I want to set things proper. Like, I appreciate you for saving my life." And it's kind of like, all right. But so the part that got me with that wasn't so much as the way she was just really like, "Oh, well, I'll just go along with it and everything's okay." Like, no, you clearly wanted to run away. But that's again a question to how long was it that she had to mull over that? How long did it take before she came to the conclusion that maybe he's not the worst person? Maybe he's not trying to harm her,
Well, I don't know. They don't really. I don't know. They don't. I couldn't really tell you
No, I
because
get you.
I don't know what there's. I mean, like I'm not really. I wasn't feeling the convention. I wasn't really convinced about their relationship in the first place, and so
Mhm.
like it makes sense. The scene that comes after this one, where she says that she'll help him, is basically her being bait for some like pedophile priest, right?
Right. Right. Well, yeah, she didn't know that going in, but that's what that turns into. But so right before that happens is when um the inspector is now doing a little deeper digging, even though he kind of knows he shouldn't be because it's going to be frowned upon by his superior, but whatever. And that's when he discovers Larkhill after the commander is being killed, and he looks into the commander's background, and the only thing that really hasn't been disclosed in his records is a place called Larkhill Detention Center. And upon discovering Larkhill, the inspector, he really finds out like, okay, this place is full of buried secrets. This place is all buried secrets. And during that scene, they jump back to V and Evie, and a statement that, or a line that V uses a few times through the movie, and he actually uses it against Evie a little later, is something that she said her father said as she was opening up to him, which is, "Artists use lies to tell the truth, while politicians tell lies to cover them up."
Mm-hmm.
And it was something about when she said that. And then we fast forward to the burial and everything, or excuse me, the buried secrets of Larkhill. And it's kind of like those two moments are more synonymous than we take them as, simply because they were in two different scenes. So she said it here to him, but he's actually living those lies. Like he's uncovering those lies. He's seeing those lies through the eyes of someone who didn't tell them. The inspector, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And after he discovers that, he starts going through the files, and he discovers priest, the priest. Now, before we get to the priest who later becomes a bishop, we also get to, after he discovers Larkhill, we get to the inspector Finch talking about Larkhill, discovering Larkhill, doing his research on Larkhill. We jump back to Evie and V, and she is cleaning a mirror. Now, this was weird to me. Why was she all of a sudden cleaning this mirror? And on the mirror, there was an omen by Faust. And it was the omen about trying to cheat the universe, or trying to cheat the devil. And it was "Vi vedi veneversum vivus vici." I did not get the full translation, so I will not butcher the translation. But again, it is "Vi vedi veneversum vivus vici," which is an omen about trying to cheat the devil by Faust. I didn't understand if that was a message to the viewers, or if it was just a filler. Like as we say, sometimes we can tell when there's been chunks of scenes taken out. Maybe that was a scene that was just left in with no purpose.
It was just kind of like it's a reference to what the government did to the people during the experimentations and thinking that they were going to get away with it. And like he is basically, you know, taking on the
Oh,
role of Satan and making sure that they get their comeuppance for their sins.
okay, I get you. It's like
Yeah.
it's like rappers say, like or like Jay-Z said, but all the rappers say it now. If you made me, make another me, so to speak.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
or it's just also saying like, you know, like you don't basically the government is Faust in this bargain and he is, you know, V is Satan. Basically saying like you can try to do, you know, whatever you can to cheat, you know, your way into being the controller of the universe, but I will always get my vengeance.
Mm. This movie is just crazy. It has a lot of good moments like that though, where you really have to reflect, like, wait, what? All right, buddy. So before we move into the Lark Hill trails and discovering certain things, anything you want to reference or mention before we jump to Lark Hill and the Bishop?
No, I mean it's pretty straightforward. I mean the whole plot isn't that involved. It's just kind of like a, you know, like the Weapon X program sort of, except that they were trying to find a vaccine for a
I was
virus.
doing my best to not say that this entire time.
I mean, it really is.
It's
It's
very
just
Weapon
Weapon
X.
D. It's instead of he's Weapon 5 and Wolverine is Weapon 10.
Yeah, yeah, and which makes sense because Wolverine is definitely twice
Oh yeah, yeah.
the V.
He's much further in the iteration for sure. Yeah, but yeah, so I mean like the, you know, the whole what the heck is the place called? Larchwood?
Lark Hill Detention
Lark
Center,
Hill.
but Lark Hill
Yeah.
Experiment Center.
Right, right. Yeah, so I mean like that's kind of like the thing, and that's what the detective is trying to unravel, this sort of like government mystery about, you know, this covered up you know, experimental site hospital sort of thing.
Mhm.
And it, you know, we later find out that there is a, you know, basically a program to try to inoculate these people that have this virus that's plaguing the earth.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, very familiar.
I don't know if I might have heard something like this about a week ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I'm getting at, you know, when I mentioned the concepts of like, well, we see these things on TV and movies, and sometimes it makes us have like cognitive dissonance when it happens in real life.
Yeah, we're not even paying attention to it most of the time.
Yeah, or just can't even digest it or really
Well,
believe it. Yeah.
and that's what I was gonna say. It's the believable part. Is it even
Mhm.
believable? Something I remember. Sidebar. Do you remember being a kid and you knew you were in trouble, but you just didn't believe you were gonna get your ass whooped until
Ye
you were actually getting your ass whooped?
Well, yeah, yeah, you definitely think that you can talk your way out,
Right.
or, you know, or like your parents won't notice what you did, you know?
Or
Yeah,
maybe they'll see
for
it your
sure.
way, which they never do.
Right, right, right. Or you
Bruh,
could, you know,
uh,
like you could try to get the report card out of the mailbox
ooh.
before they get home or something like
See,
that, you know?
I wanna say this, I was never that lucky. I
Yeah,
was
me neither.
okay, yeah. I
Yeah,
was the kid where report cards got put in the parents' hands because I was in private
right,
school early.
right.
Jeez. I
Not
remember
not fun.
mm-mm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you this one time, and we could talk about it in a different episode of something else, but I only remember one time I knew I had a C, and boy, if I didn't go to the office, can I just call my mom before she get here?
Yeah, can I just give her a forewarning?
Like I know her parent teacher conference is today. Can I just call her now? Like,
Yeah. Get this over with. I don't want, yeah, that was the worst too. It's like when you realize something like, oh man, my parents probably got my report card today and it's
oh
12 p.m. I still got 4 hours until I see them, you know, like
right, yeah. If you couldn't tell time, you could tell time once you got in trouble for sure.
oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
All right. So once we get through the evolution at this point of their relationship and them starting to have these bonding moments over false statements and the truths of who her parents were, we go back to the inspector who's beginning to follow the money trails that are Lark Hill and realizing that there are pastors who were paid $200,000, and that particular pastor is now a bishop. So when you're a bishop, you're placed somewhere. It's kind of easy to find you. And if you're in law enforcement, I could just pretty much pop up, right?
Hmm.
And That's what they thought they were going to do. That's what they intended on doing. They intended on trying to save the bishop because they figured he would probably be one of the people on the list. Well, when we're introduced to the bishop, we find out that even in V for Vendetta, there is something sinister about the clergy.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular clergy member is a pedophile for young girls.
Mm-hmm.
So Evie
I
poses
mean, like they don't necessarily
pish
explicitly
posh,
say it.
pish posh.
They kind of say it. I mean, like to me, it's like okay, Evie is definitely in her mid-20s.
Correct. And they say she's a little too old. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so I mean, like it could be possible that he likes girls in their 19, 18 range, but I
But
think
she was dressed up like one of those
yeah,
Harajuku middle schoolers in anime.
yeah, exactly. So I think that that's kind of like the nod. It's like, oh no, he likes them young, and
Right,
so
right. And that
yeah,
was, if I'm being honest, I didn't even allow the moment to go any further in my mind than okay, you're a weirdo.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I'm not even going to
yeah.
dive into how much of a weirdo you are. It's
Oh
just
yeah,
I'm not okay
for
with it.
sure.
So after that, she's trying to tell him like, "Hey, somebody's coming to kill you,"
Yeah,
and
she's
he's
having
so
second thoughts about all of it.
right, exactly. But he's so far gone into his power, the pollution that the power has done to his brain. Of I can do no wrong. It really doesn't matter what you're saying, whether you're serious or not. I'm going to get what I want.
Yeah, and he also thought she was playing and
Mhm.
like role playing with him. But yeah, so V
So
shows up and
right, so V shows up and she runs off. He gets killed, and the bishop, excuse me, the bishop is killed, and from there she runs to her friend's house. But we'll get right to that in a moment. Now, what I thought was very interesting within that entire moment is after the bishop, the bodies are building up, and the bodies are building up so fast and so much so that there's just another NSA roundtable has to be had. But instead of it being had, clearly it's had without the Inspector Finch. And the result of that is Mr. Creedy coming in to speak to Inspector Finch and letting him know that he's under watch, and they're aware that he is basically of mixed race. He is not a pure breed because his mother is Irish, meaning he is not to be trusted because he is not one of them. And it again just resets that tone. It reinstates that tone of, hey, even people behind the line who think they're working with and for the people in power, even they're under the scrutiny of what they consider the new law.
oh yeah, that's pardon me. That's always the way it goes.
Mhm.
Like the machinations of the machine don't spare anybody.
Mhm.
It's always going to be turned against you, and that's what this inspector finds out, that he just starts to dig a little bit too far, and then all of a sudden he's on the receiving end of the authoritarian government that like he was a part of.
Right.
And those are, as I said, those are, themes that run through most of societies, where it's like, this is what happens when, governments get too consumed with power and corruption. They start to feed on themselves, and ideologies feed on themselves, and they start to cannibalize ideas and people, so.
Right. And so from there, whew, I just reflected on what you said. That hit me a little late, but dang. Um, but so then we jump back to Evie going to her friend's house. Now I forget her friend's name. I know I wrote it down a little later because I remembered it.
Gordon. Yeah.
Gordon, Inspector Gordon. No. But yeah, so now she goes to visit her friend Gordon for safe haven to basically find out he's also a fugitive. He has a bunch of hidden artifacts, and he's basically a victim of the banished and the unsightly list as well. Basically, as telling his story, I think he's suggesting to Evie that he is a homosexual and he
Yeah,
cannot live his life freely because
right.
of the standard of society.
But
But
he's like a Jimmy Fallon type or a Dave Letterman sort of
right,
type. He's a late night sort of host, TV host.
right. So he's so revered in the public that as long as he just does what everybody knows him for, he doesn't believe he'll be outed and or bothered at all.
Hmm.
However, he has no problem breaking the law and he'll do anything seemingly for Evie, including die.
Yeah, apparently.
But will you die for me? Um, and that's excuse me, guys. I apologize for that. That's seemingly what happens, and that's where his home is raided. A little later into it, they're having their discussions. His home is raided. He runs in and tells Evie to hide, and we have a scene that is very reminiscent of the story she told of how her mother was taken as well.
Mm.
She's hiding under the bed. Gordon is knocked to the floor the same way her mother was. He looks at her as she is under the bed the same way her mother did, and she is dragged off by Creedy's men the same way her mother was dragged off by Creedy's men. That to me was clearly the beginning of the turning point for Evie, not as a character, but as a human being.
Yeah, I mean, this basically thrusts her into the fight, whereas before she was reluctant and kind of not really wanting to be a part of V's, sort of plot, and that's why, she ran away after the Bishop incident. It's the death of Gordon that kind of puts her back into the game because she's, but not even necessarily, because that's not true either. So it wasn't even the death of Gordon that really made her, into a militant person. It's what happened after she tries to leave Gordon's house.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
as she, hold on, let's let that breathe,
Mm.
because man. Um. So from there, excuse me, the bishop is taken, and I realized it took me a minute to realize that this happened right before actually they raided Gordon's house. As the bishop is taken to the morgue, the attending coroner, Dr. I gotta start writing these names right next to the Dr. Delia. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but the coroner receives the extinct flower that is put upon all of the bodies that V kills, and she almost looks like she's seen a ghost. We found out a little later that she understands that that is the sign that death is coming for her as well. And we discover, as the inspector is doing his homework after leaving the coroner's office, that the lady who originally created the entire program that created V has changed her name and now works as a coroner. That's right. The coroner is the creator of Operation Oppenheimer, which is the name of the secret agenda, I guess you would call it, or the name of the experiment, the project that created V, and they were basically trying to create super soldiers, and in the same wind, they were trying to create the perfect cure for a virus that was going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that they were initially trying to create the cure, but what happened was that V responded to the vaccine in a way that created a super soldier sort of person.
Isn't that always how it happens?
Yeah, it wasn't actually them intentionally trying to create like superhuman people. It was just like they were trying to create this vaccine, and they just kept killing people over and over and over again until they got to V, and V was the only one that was able to accept the vaccine, and then not only accept it, but it made him turn into like like a Captain America level sort of.
Not Captain America. Say it.
What's that?
Say it.
Like no, not Deadpool, because Deadpool is way more powerful than
he is. You're
than
right.
V. So I say,
Yeah, okay, it will be more Captain America.
Captain America level. He's got super reflexes. He has super strength. Maybe not to the level of Captain America, but yeah.
But Cap heals kind of more like V than Deadpool.
Yeah,
Deadpool
a little bit
more
faster.
like Wolverine. You're right.
Right. Yeah.
Wow, you're right. Super regenerative cells. He does not have those.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Well, good point. So yeah, we'll switch that, guys. V is much more, and actually, even considering, let's call his katanas, let's consider those his shield.
Mhm.
Or his
Right.
mask. His mask actually would be his shield.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at that point, V has left a document that cataloged after killing the after killing the doctor. V crept in, had a discussion with the doctor, and killed her with a poison that he injected into her without her noticing. So she didn't even realize she was already dead as they were having a discussion.
Mhm.
After that, he left a binder that was a document cataloged with cataloged with information from Larkhill and his origin, to which the inspector the chancellor told Inspector Finch that he was to destroy and deny the existence of any of that information,
Mhm.
and that if any of that information were to ever come back out or to be noted, it would be treasonous and it would be held against him, as no one else should have that information.
Yeah. Basically, it's the diary from the doctor lady that created the program, talking about how, like she started off very hopeful that they were going to be able to find a cure for this virus that was plaguing the world, and then over time she started to see the people and these patients as disgusting, and she started to hate them because like over time she just got so numb to the fact that they were just killing people over and over again. The human life meant less and less to her, and the only thing that really gave her any more interest was the fact that there was a man that seemed to be responding well to the vaccine, um, and who was held in cell 5, and 5 was in Roman numerals, so you get V. But yeah, so it's an interesting sort of it's an interesting sort of moment, because she does admit to the fact that, like, she started off as wanting to have this sort of altruistic goal, and then over time, through just the witnessing the sheer expendability of human life, that she just became hardened and callous and didn't care about them anymore.
Right. What they expect to happen to all of us if you pay attention to social media.
Right. Yeah.
And so from there we get the inspector, who he's really just thinking now. He's read this binder, he's seen everything firsthand, what's going on. He's the person collecting all of these bodies that V leaves behind.
Mm-hmm.
And after reading the diaries and really looking into it and looking through the history and doing his own research, he starts to think to himself, is the government the cause of over 100,000 deaths? And did they cover it up as a terrorist attack?
Mm-hmm.
He's not only thinking this, he's doing his research, and he's now asked his deputy, because he's the chief inspector, his deputy inspector, would he be in the same light to think that it's possible the government is responsible?
Right.
Now, what I think is really interesting about that, and this is right as we're moving into the G-Men breaking into Gordon's home. So the inspector is really getting deeper and deeper into the whole thought processes of it all. And during that, seemingly at the same time he's doing his research in his office, you have the popular television show where Evie's friend Gordon is the writer, host, and producer and creator of the show. And they've created a slapstick style episode of the Chancellor and V as characters.
Mm-hmm. And they
It's
make fun of the Chancellor, and yeah.
Right. They make fun of the Chancellor. It's very, and again, at this time in 2005, back when this movie came out, we were actually dealing with, I want to say this was kind of a national situation. Do you remember when, I think it was South Park, who had put it was a Muslim religious leader, or a Muslim.
Oh yeah, the cartoon of Muhammad.
Thank you. It was Muhammad, the cartoon of Muhammad that had aired, and it was like that was the almost going to cause
What's funny
real
about that?
contentions.
What's funny about that is that episode actually didn't even show Muhammad's image.
It didn't,
He was in a bear mascot outfit, and he would literally, they just said this bear person in a bear mascot is Muhammad, and that's what got them canceled for that. When the funny thing is that a few seasons before that, Muhammad was featured actually as an actual person and as a part of like the Super Friends, who was in a team with Jesus and a couple other figures.
Wait, so it wasn't that episode? It was something that came after.
It was the other one that came after, where they said Muhammad was in this mascot uniform, and the whole episode was about how they couldn't show his face, and so the only thing you could see of Muhammad was him in this bear mascot. outfit. You
Wow.
know?
I
Yeah.
had no clue. I had no clue. But so
Yeah.
this that's wow, that's crazy. But so yeah, the Chancellor and Veek episode that was created was very reminiscent, in my opinion, of that. And because Gordon was the show host later that evening, he is visited by Creedy and the G-Men, or excuse me, Creedy and the
Fingerman.
Fingermen. The
Yeah.
Fingermen. I apologize. But to create by Creedy and the Fingermen, and thus the scene we told you about a moment ago, where Gordon is smacked over the head, Evie is under the bed, and Gordon is then snatched up by the Fingermen. Evie then tries to run, and that is when Evie is snatched up. As she exits the gate, she is grabbed up by a figure in all black.
Hmm.
What happens
Yeah.
next?
And then she gets thrown into a interrogation room where she is told that they need her to disclose the whereabouts of V and any information that she might have about him. She reluctantly refuses. They said, okay, it's time to process her. This is where we get the famous scene of Natalie Portman actually getting her hair shaved for real. And those are real tears because she was very upset about having to shave her hair. I guess it was
Yes,
the first
I
time
actually
that
saw
she
that
ever
video.
had to go that short. So,
Yeah. Hey,
but,
I want to say, not to cut you off, but not to
yeah.
interrupt so much. I want to say that I remember when she was discussing that when they were doing the tour, like, the
Mm-hmm.
rollout tour for this.
Yeah.
And it was like she got emotional every time she told that story. But by the time the movie came out, it was almost like her claim to fame of the movie. Like, yeah, I cut
Right.
my hair off and I did
Right.
that for y'all, and y'all better love
Mm-hmm.
this thing. It was crazy.
Oh yeah, 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 for sure. So she gets processed and she gets deloused and then she gets thrown in a holding cell.
I'm sorry.
And so she's going through this really traumatic thing where she's getting basically slop once a day, and she's just kind of lying in the cell. We don't know how many days it's been, but it's been at least a few days. Could have been months, who knows. And this is when she finds a note that's in a rat hole. um, and she goes on to read this note about a woman who was apparently in the same cell as Evie is currently occupying. And she wrote this sort of last testament of her life where she talks about how, she was young and, she remembers the time before all the authoritarianism happened. And, she was, a woman that was in love with another woman, and her, struggles going through that with her family accepting her. And then, finally finding the right person for her, only to, basically be with the person that she loves for a few short years before the government goes crazy and starts snatching people up. And, this woman ends up in the same cell that Evie's in. And so she writes this note about how, this is her life. And, like, even though she's in this cell right now, she wouldn't trade it for any of those 3 years that she got to just be herself.
Right.
And it's nice. It's a very, very human story. It's very, very touching. And so this kind of gives Evie enough fuel, enough humanity to kind of, carry on. And so some more time passes, and they finally confront Evie and tell her that she's been marked for execution because she's not willing to give up V's information. She says, okay. Then at the last second, the guy, who basically all the figures that have been in this sort of jail scene are very shadowy and you can't tell who they are.
Right.
And so the guy that's told her that she's about to be executed is like, well, if you just give us some information, we will let you go. You can just do that. And she says, no, actually, I'd rather die. And, then basically the guy's like, oh, huh. Yeah.
Before we go to what the guy says after she says, "Kapia." So what I want to get to Valerie really quick before we get too far away from her, the lady who wrote the story. This is where I kind of began to build my plot line for that timeline I was discussing at the beginning of the show. Because she is the person who mentioned that she started her acting career in 2015. Then we note that she had 3 or 4 years with her lover before homosexuality was considered dangerous. Crazy. But I'm that blows my mind still to this day, because even in 2005 that was so far fetched, but even looking at us in 2021, it's like, oh, I guess it wasn't that far fetched.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess this is why they say we shouldn't comment on their life. I get it, but I also looked at those things, and we started weaving together all of that. That was before she met V, then getting to her meeting V, and then the amount of time. And again, that's where I started my plot line. I just wanted to add that so that everyone knows that's where I started. That's how I started my timeline, is noting that was the earliest time we had ever heard of her beginning her career before being imprisoned for her lifestyle.
right, right. And so yeah, Evie is told that she's going to be executed. She kind of, gives into her fate, and the person basically says, "Then it's time," and leaves the door open. And Evie's a little bit perplexed as to why the other people haven't come to collect her and execute her yet. So she pokes her head out the door, sees a guard at the end of the hallway, looks at the guard a little bit longer, realizes there's something off about the guard. She starts to slowly walk to the end of the hallway, only to find that the guard is actually just a mannequin and has just been standing there this whole time. And then she gets to the door at the end of the hallway, opens the door, only to find out that she's just back in V's bunker.
Mm-hmm.
She's back in V's bunker. And this is my biggest issue with the entire movie.
I'm glad. Yes.
Because I cannot abide this. I cannot abide this. So first off, that was V that shaved her head.
Yep.
That was V that stripped her down and deloused her and pressure washed her.
Yep.
And that was V that tortured her. That was V that interrogated her and let her
waterboarded her and everything.
Let her sit in the cell for months on end.
Yep.
And then he's just like,
"Oh, hey, and gave her unedible food."
Yeah. "Oh, hey, girl, how you doing? Oh, you finally caught on, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Good for you." And then he tries to twist it as this, like, "Oh, well, remember, this is the only time that you've ever been not afraid of death." And, like, and basically Evie's having like a panic attack because she just spent the last 3 months thinking that she was going to die, only to find out that it was V that orchestrated this whole thing, basically just to brainwash Evie into becoming an extremist. Like, it's crazy because she even says in the middle of their arguing, like, she's like, "I can't feel anything anymore."
Right.
So he literally like brainwashed her, and then MK ultra'd her into being a Manchurian candidate for a terrorist plot.
Right. which is why I always felt like it was almost inevitable to have a V for Vendetta 2.
Mm-hmm.
But I never cared to go look for it. So
yeah, no, I don't think it exists. But like that's kind of my biggest thing about this whole storyline, because I'm like, okay, so I can understand like Evie after that is very upset, and she's like, "Look, I'm gonna leave. I don't want to be a part of this anymore," which I totally understand.
You know what I mean? I think he would have understood. Like, you know what? You're right.
Well, he basically did, because he understood that he was being crazy. Right. But like even still, like, it still ends up working out for him, I guess. But that was my biggest issue with the whole thing, is like, so basically this is like a Stockholm syndrome sort of thing where like this guy brainwashes this girl to basically blow up Parliament because he holds a grudge about a few people that are in the government. Like, I get it. I get the whole overtones of the authoritarian government and they're evil and stuff, but this was why I made the point. I wish we would have seen a little bit more evil, because it doesn't seem as though that blowing up Parliament, destroying this girl's life, and getting the people that were surrounded by her killed was the cost that you pay for your little grudge, because you became a super soldier or a superhero.
You mad at you super?
Yeah, you're mad that you can punch a person through a wall. Like, I'm sorry, is that what you're so sad about? But then you find out that he's basically, his whole mode of being is to avenge the girl that wrote the note, and it wasn't. It was kind of about him, but it was more about her and the life that she didn't get to live because of this totalitarian government, which is totally
he wasn't that selfless. I'm sorry.
No, that's totally a cop out. He's just
even is that selfless.
Sure, maybe
he is not.
No, definitely not. And so Evie decides to leave, and basically he just says that, like, hey, if you if you give me one last thing, is just to come back on the November 4th or something, right?
Yeah,
It
let
was
me
like
the day before.
the
Like,
day before, come back and let me see you one last time or something like that, right?
yeah. Listen, he sound to me like at that point, he sounded like that guy that beats his woman. She finally
Yeah,
decided to leave, and it's like,
yeah,
hey,
yeah,
well,
yeah, yeah,
I'll be here if you need me.
yeah.
For
Can
what?
we go get coffee sometime?
Right? Right? You
Yeah,
still like ice cream?
yeah, yeah.
So, but from there, she's had this embracing moment. She's embracing her lack of her fearlessness. She's
Mhm.
embracing the fact that she's been broken.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, just let that one stew for a
Broken
minute.
and brainwashed and radicalized. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people. I hate to put it this way, but I have to show people where we can look in the mirror, but not look in the mirror. Some of us are going through those kind of situations where we have someone who's done things to us that we don't necessarily approve of, but we think is love, or we think that they care
Mm.
about us. So we still there. For those people, just know there is help. You just have to
Mhm.
tell people you need it. Um, and that's in a lot of different walks of life. So what I think is crazy about it, and to me, the proof that something is broken in Evie at this point. This has nothing to do any longer. I think it stopped having to do with V probably by like day 3 of her in that cell. After that, it was just her left to her own volition. Like she was breaking at the seam, busting at the seams when she was out.
Yeah, yeah. I
You know,
mean, well, yeah, because he literally broke her psyche.
hmm
I mean, like, yeah. So
and
I,
so
yeah. So
so then she breaks down and she tells him she needs to breathe, and he goes, "Oh, there's a lift to a roof." Which at first I'm thinking like, no, she wanted you to take her like somewhere she could run. Fool. But he takes her upstairs to the roof and it's pouring down rain. And I'm like, okay, so this is the perfect rain for a fight scene, but it's not gonna happen. And she walks into the rain, and it's seemingly the synonymous moment of when V walks through the fire as he is birthed into whom he becomes.
reborn.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like she's reborn in the water the way he was reborn in the fire. And she makes the statement, God is in the rain. And I think that is kind of the same tote that carried with him again with the fire of, like Nick said, the rebirth. It's simply
Mhm.
rebirth. I'm just anew. And after all the talk, she leaves on her own.
Yeah.
Like there is no fight, there is no back and forth. It's They have a discussion. She agrees she's gonna leave. He says, okay, fine. And then we jump to the round table where they are basically introducing that they are gonna start a civil war.
Mhm.
Um, and that's where you know that at that point Inspector Finch is out. He doesn't know Evie is gone, but he is aware that his own supervisors, the people who work on the same level as him, they're all breaking at the seams as well. V has broken their psyche as much as he has broken Evie's psyche, and everybody's acting out of sorts, so to speak. Nobody's thinking rational. Nobody's trying to act appropriately. So in that light, Inspector Finch moves forward and he goes to meet with V. Not knowing he's meeting with V, he thinks he's meeting Mr. Rockford or Rockwood, excuse me, Mr.
Mhm.
Rockwood. Mr. Rockwood was a person who was discovered to have been a member of the staff at Larkhill. So in his mind, he's just going to meet with someone who's worked there, he can get some information out of, who seemingly could be a whistleblower. He goes, he finds V. He doesn't know he's talking to V, but that's who he's talking to the entire time. And after he meets with V, V starts to tell him a story of how the Chancellor rose to power, the domination that came with the Chancellor's rise to power, Creedy's part in the entire massacre and everything that's happened, and his absolute goal, how the pharmaceutical companies, the military, the media, and everything that the government controls is used to inflict fear and rule on the people.
Mhm.
After that, it is very clear that Inspector Finch is ready to go to war with his own government to find the truth. However, he gets a little bit of a change of heart because he realizes or he discovers through some more research that Mr. Rockwood's dead. He's been dead for
Mm.
about 20 years. And you literally were just sitting face to face with the man known as V. Where before we move on, Nick, what did you
Yeah.
think of that scene? Because I have some thoughts about that scene.
Well, I mean, it's good. It's a good little exposition scene to talk about how, the government became this so sort of tyrannical system.
Mhm.
I mean, it seems like it was necessary to just kind of move the detectives along the lines of like realizing that, it's possible that this all could just be a lie. Because basically, once he realizes that Rockwood is V, he's like, well, this is BS then. He just fed me a story. And it's,
Right.
like, so he gets demoralized about the sort of like the conspiracy theory that he was, unraveling. But yeah, aside from that, like, it's not that big of a scene, to be honest. I don't,
Right.
I, a lot of the rest of this kind of blurs together in my head. So
Yes.
I have a hard time keeping it all together.
No, I got you covered. And so that's kind of why I asked, is that is to me the last definitive scene of uh this like, you have plot points. This is gonna happen, this is gonna happen, this
Hmm.
is gonna happen. That was the last moment where it's like, all right, like you said, everything kind of just mushes together.
Yeah.
Everything else can literally be a whole one discussion. It can literally
Right.
be a discussion.
Yeah.
So from there, oh, excuse me, before I move forward. And so for me, the reason that scene is so pivotal is because it gives you the meat, it gives you the bread, it gives you the onions and the lettuce. It even gives you the condiments. The only thing that's missing is the plate and the napkins, and that's that's the other side of everything. I don't even think you need that at that point. You get literally everything you need out of that scene. If you're just looking for the origin, if you're just trying to understand, hey, how did we get here? You get it
Hmm.
all right there in that scene. So from there we move to V going to creep up on Creedy. I thought that was a cool scene. Simply because Creedy was kind of like that guy. He almost seemed like the untouchable guy. So for even V to creep up on him and expose him, like, listen, I know you better than you know you. So let me tell you who you are and what's going to happen and how this is going to work. I know
Right.
you're going to say, okay, why do I know that? Because I know you better than you know you. And I know
Hmm.
what you're really here for. And you're here for power. You're not here to be his lackey. And that's what you are.
Yeah. And so
Um,
he turns Creedy against the Chancellor.
And well, in my opinion, I don't think he turned Creedy against the Chancellor. I think he accelerated Creedy's moment to take out the Chancellor. I think
Mm.
Creedy already was plotting on him.
Yeah.
Like he showed him, like, look, you even keep your best men closest to him. Like, you got to have an ace in the hole at all times, so you even have that. So no, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Where it's seemingly if Creedy were in any way aligned with the Chancellor or loyal to the Chancellor, after that scene, he definitely was not.
Hmm.
And that's when we realized we literally have 5 more days until November 5th. So it is November 1st. And on November 1st, the inspector says that he has a hunch. Now, his hunch, of course, is shot down by his supervisors, but he follows his hunch. And that hunch lets him know, or that hunch basically through a little more research shows him that a civil war is imminent based on the actions and the outcomes that began years and years ago that no one today can stop. But if you know that they are happening, you can possibly do something to help.
Hmm. Yeah, and we also get the basically V sent out a whole bunch of masks and outfits to everybody in London, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah, that is
And so
I would
that
say that
starts the
the
sort
next.
of like chaos that happens, right? So society starts to degrade. People start wearing a mask to rob people. A little girl is wearing one of the masks, and the fingerman shoots her. And then you realize it's a little girl, and the whole neighborhood basically surrounds him and kills him.
Right.
And so
That's
basically, society's busting at the seams.
correct. That's the boiling point right there. And so as all of this is about to try, this is right before the little girl actually gets killed. Evie returns to V and discloses a story that proves that his methods have worked to perfection as far as changing who she is. She notes that saw someone that she knew, stared them in the face, talked to them even because there was a transaction and they did not recognize her.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if that is as much of a success as she thinks it is, but again, when you're brainwashed, whatever you were told is a success is what you will go along with. But from there is where, after they have their moment and they talk and they dance, and then we get to the Chancellor announcing that if V is successful in his endeavors, that Creedy will be forced into resignation, which is essentially what V told Creedy was gonna happen. If this does not work the way the Chancellor thinks, you will be the one to take the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, V gives no, excuse me. From there, he's made his choice. He's gone forward. Everything is going according to plan. He and Evie are making their way to the train for him to commit the act in which he needs to. But there is where he reveals that it is not he, but Evie who must make the choice for a better tomorrow. Now, while he's explaining that to her, he is also explaining to her that tonight will be his last night on Earth, and he must die with the world that was born of the same pain that he was born.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty cool. Just again, V is clearly a character of some type of honor and integrity.
I think it's a cop out. So you're gonna go destroy society and then die?
Yeah.
So you don't have to deal with the repercussions?
Yes.
Just leave a power vacuum.
Yeah.
So this is his plan. He's going to destroy the government and leave a power vacuum for the people to have to fill. And which will probably happen is that you'll have sort of like kingpins and cartels that could get created that start to, basically run everything.
I mean, hey, listen, did Superman save the world, lose his family, and stay? No.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm saying that he doesn't even really save the world. He blows up Parliament.
He doesn't save anything. He just makes a big confetti party.
Yeah, pretty much.
And that's actually another reason I was thinking like they could definitely do a V for Vendetta too, because we don't know what happened after this. It ends as a feel good story, but we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
So once he's explained this to her that he will die of in the same world he will die with the world that was born of the same pain that he was. We go to Creedy, where Creedy is waiting for him with his boys, and he comes up and he's like, all right, well, bring the Chancellor out, because he and Creedy have an agreement that if Creedy kills the Chancellor, brings the Chancellor to him and takes him out, that Creedy gets him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Creedy knows that V's not going to give up, but hey, let me tell you how that story goes. Creedy kills the Chancellor. After Creedy kills the Chancellor and calls him disgusting, I thought that was kind of cool too. It was a little obnoxious. That was a little obnoxious, but cool in an obnoxious way. A showdown begins between V, Creedy, and all of the fingermen or Creedy's agents that are with him. And once again, for the final time, V shows us, the audience, what Larkin Hill has made him. I am going to say there are only 3 characters I can think of off the top of my head that could have done anything similar. We've already named 2. One is Wolverine, one is Deadpool. Can you think of a third character that can do something similar? I'm not going to say do exactly that, but do something similar to what he did.
What, take a whole bunch of shots and keep going?
Yeah. Well, and not necessarily take him because he was wearing a bulletproof vest, but, take out a crew the way he took them out.
I don't know.
I can only name one. Batwing.
Oh, okay.
Only Batwing. And the only reason as Batwing. And the only reason I would say Batwing is because we know at a certain point he will kill.
Gotcha.
So it's like, everybody else, hey, you left too many people alive.
Right.
So from that scene, Creedy dies immediately. V told him how he was going to die with his hands around his throat after taking every single bullet out of every single gun that was in that room. V is still alive, barely, and he keeps his promise and he kills Creedy by choking him out and lifting him against a fence, showing that he is still superhuman even as he is dying. To come from that, he then makes it from there we get to the night side end of all of the riots that's began because of the finger man who shot the young girl who was wearing the mask as she was spray painting on the bridge. Now we're at the nighttime mode of that. And at night, the entire London has dressed up in the foxy mask with a cape, and they are all making their way towards Parliament at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It is all barricaded off by the military. I don't know if they would call that their National Guard, their Coast Guard, or just, Capitol Security. I don't know. But they have a bunch of military personnel out there. However, the military personnel aren't getting any orders because command is down. Creedy is dead, and so is the chancellor. So there's no one to give orders except for the general who is on the field who refuses to give that order.
Mm-hmm.
He orders his men to stand down, and the civilians move forward into position to view the spectacular night that V has promised for them.
Mm-hmm.
From that point, V makes it back to Evie only to die in her arms. Isn't that cute?
Yeah, very nice.
She somehow gets him on top of the bombs in the fire.
Yeah.
I don't know how this happens. Like, did she become superhuman too?
I guess she can lift 220 pounds.
Because that was a big boy, nah.
He was a big dude. Yeah.
So I was so confused. To this day, that part of this, that is one of those scenes in this movie where I'm like, all right, look, you could have had Inspector Finch come down and just be a good guy and help her do that. Like, for real.
Right. Or she could have dragged him and not put him on an elevated platform.
Yeah. Can he just be laying on the floor with the flowers? I would have bought
that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I would have bought the adrenaline. Just the adrenaline got her to drag his huge body that far.
Mm-hmm.
But after some persuasion, after she's gotten him up there, and then Inspector Finch has found her and basically stops her. Hey, don't pull that lever. I'll shoot you.
Mm-hmm.
And after a little persuasion, she's convinced Inspector Finch that the best thing to do is to send the bomb and to begin anew tomorrow, to destroy what is today and begin anew tomorrow. They then go to the top of, I guess, the train station they're in. That part's not really clear because it would almost be that they're standing on top of the same clock tower that they're exploding. Doesn't really make sense.
Pretty close, yeah.
But they're standing atop of, I guess, the train station from which they sent the bomb towards Parliament, and Parliament begins to explode.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is really where the movie ends, but I have to ask you, Nick, did you see the Disney fireworks in the background?
Oh, yeah.
Definitely the 9:30 show.
Well, because, you can't, if you didn't put fireworks up, it would almost look like it's a terroristic plot that might have killed innocent people.
Oh,
so by putting fireworks up, it makes it look like it's all good that you just blew up one of the most historic buildings in all of England.
and wasn't that
after the leader of the authoritarian government was already murdered, you decided to blow up the Parliament building.
Right. Now, if I remember correctly, wasn't that some type of an issue in real world time when this movie came out that they blew up Big Ben?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because this is what, 2-3 years after 9/11? And we're having a movie.
Well, 3-4 years. 3-4 years after 9/11.
Yeah, 3 years after 9/11. 2005. So 4 years. Yeah. 4 years after 9/11. We're still sensitive about the terrorist thing. And we're still sensitive about buildings blowing up, Yeah.
Right.
Which, I mean, I totally understand. And I don't like pearl clutching. I don't think that it's cute. So I'm not going to be a pearl clutcher about it. But I just think that the comic book probably has a lot more material. And I think that adapting it into a movie was okay, but it was, I don't know. It sends me a lot of mixed messages, this movie. It's like, okay, I get it. Stand up to an authoritarian government, but then you're killing innocent people in the process. And like you're creating a bigger problem by destroying the government without any, solutions as to what's next. Like,
sounds very familiar.
Torturing a young girl to make her an agent of chaos for you is also kind of a weird one.
One that doesn't belong in politics sounds familiar again.
Right. I mean, it's funny because, we've romanticized this V character. I mean, you think about Anonymous, right?
Yeah.
So, like there was a huge movement of, Guy Fawkes and even Occupy Wall Street. And even still in some of these, protests, you'll see a Guy Fawkes mask once in a while. So it's like it's
the whole Brexit thing. Didn't they use Guy Fawkes masks for that?
Oh, I'm sure they did. Yeah. But so it's become this like cultural LARP that people do, that anytime there's like a protest, somebody has to have a Guy Fawkes mask on because it means revolution. But no, I mean, like that's wearing, and this is where I get upset at people too. It's like wearing a Che Guevara shirt,
I was
like
just thinking, I was like, is it
Che
the same as
Guevara
wearing the Che Guevara shirt?
Che Guevara killed innocent people left and right.
Mhm.
He shouldn't be somebody you wear on a shirt like he's just, some regular guy. Like
If I
that.
told you the amount of papers I had to do on Che Guevara, and
Yeah.
and the amount of times I had to redact the fact of the truth of how he felt about people who looked like me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's not
And
good, man.
I had to explain that to a
Like,
professor one day. I was like, let me explain to you. I had to actually take that out of the story because I couldn't come in here and give
yeah,
a 3 hour presentation without talking about that for a whole nother 3 hours. So I had to just take it
totally.
out.
Totally. So I think that, like this isn't somebody who you should aspire to be. You shouldn't be aspiring to be somebody like V. I'm sorry. It's like, as I said, he destroyed a government and then died so that he didn't have to deal with the aftermath. So I mean, like this isn't a revolutionary in my opinion. This is kind of like, I don't know. It's a cautionary tale to me in a lot of respects. I understand the need to push against authoritarian governments for sure, but I think that this is kind of like one of those psyops where it's like, oh, the good guy would blow up things and not just, and not just find a way to civilly disobey until the government became weakened.
Right.
No, no. Now we have to commit violent acts in order to, in order to right the course.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
It seems that's always been one of the extremes of change. Either
Mhm.
you're willing to incite or produce violence,
Right.
or you're willing to have a stance so strong that it's going to offend people to the ends of the earth.
Right.
And I use that example because we were just talking about Che Guevara. And the reality is there are plenty of people, whether it's him or we can go down a list, who know the good and don't know those other sides. Because
Mhm.
we're not,
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't. I want to make sure people, even with V in this movie, it's not saying that there was no good to him. There
Right.
was plenty of good intent, but the saying goes, "What the road to hell is paved with good intentions."
Absolutely.
So we can have all of the best intentions, but at some point, someone's going to be offended, someone's going to be hurt, someone may die. And those are the things that I think we have to just be honest about when we're venturing forth and into any journey, into anything that we want to stand on and stand by. There's going to be someone that opposes. And if you're unfortunate enough, some of those people who oppose might have a little more influence than you.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of the Nietzsche quote, right? It's take care while hunting monsters that you yourself do not become a monster.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
It's that's just the whole thing. It's like
Was that
and
Nietzsche?
yeah, yeah.
Jeez. I've heard that
Um
quote so many times. I never knew that was
Oh
Nietzsche.
yeah, it's a very good one. But I mean, like, yeah, but that's just kind of the lesson. It's like I understand, like somebody like V, I can understand where he's coming from, and I can understand that we don't want to live in a world where, government has that much kind of authority over us for sure.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but I mean, like, the problem is the easier way to do that is to make sure that world doesn't pop up before. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
instead of letting it grow into something that is almost like a monolith that needs, violence to destroy, you should not let it pop up in the first place.
Right.
And I think, like being cautious of that kind of stuff is good. But, it is a movie and it's all for entertainment. And so, I'm not going to try to dig too deep
Right.
into a
Yeah,
pop
just to
culture
be
thing.
clear, guys, we
Yeah.
understand these are movies. We do.
Oh, totally.
We're
Yeah.
just also honest about the fact that somebody put brain power into this.
Yeah, yeah, and that's meant to make you think about these types of things, and I think that there's some interesting comments here about authoritarianism and what it takes to catalyze change, and I understand change always needs a catalyst. I just don't necessarily think that we should romanticize um, the way that we do sometimes, because we think, and this is where I was talking about the separation of TV and movies and reality. We kind of think like, because we see it so much in video games or TVs or movies, that like, oh, I could be a revolutionary. I could be one of those people
Right.
that donned the mask and rushed at soldiers with guns.
Man,
But
listen,
wait until you're actually into that position and realize that, oh man, this isn't
it's
the
work.
movies. This isn't TV. Like
Right.
this is the real world and there are lives at stake,
Well, something I told a friend of mine. This might have been right after New Year's, maybe before New Year's, but it was around the holidays.
Mm,
And we were having a discussion about how some people just don't speak their mind. And I'm like, well, here's the thing about me. Anyone who knows me knows I am willing to speak my mind, so much so that if you're offended by it, I'm going to congratulate you on having an opinion on that.
mhm.
Like, I don't mind if you disagree. I mind if you don't allow me to get my statement out and then say, hey, I disagree. Like,
Yeah,
it's fine, you disagree. And
for
I
sure.
think there's just a level of importance that comes with that, and it's missed very
Yeah.
largely. It is missed.
Yeah. Well, for sure. And there's a lot of reasons that we are missing that kind of stuff. But
Mhm.
not to get too culturally, and
Right. Look,
into
look at it,
that.
about to do a whole nother show.
Yeah, exactly. So, since we're pretty much wrapped up with this, I think we need to get into our reviews,
Yes,
and
indeed.
our ratings here. So, Keelan, do you want to start, or you want me to start?
I will begin.
Go
So
for it.
overall, my review of this movie is, and I'm sure some people could tell, I liked it. I really liked this movie. However, as I said from the beginning, this is one of those movies I can watch over and over and over. However, as I said, also at watching it as someone who was older than I was when it came out, letting it sit with me for time, there are some moments that had me really questioning, like, all right, what was the purpose there? Um, but overall, I enjoyed it. I know I have a few quotes and lines from it that I want to share. But I will give my rating first. In fact, something I don't usually do. I usually don't get my rating till a lot later when we're like, all right before we're closing out. But I'm gonna give my rating right now,
Go for it.
and I'm gonna give this a solid 4.
All right.
I'm gonna give
Nice.
this a solid 4, and I'm only giving it a 4 and not a 4.5, not a 5. Because as much as I like the movie, there are a couple of things like the timeline doesn't really make sense.
Mm,
The change in, I was going to say a Natalie Portman, but the change in Evie's temperament on certain things so drastically kind of threw me left. And most importantly, the main thing that does not allow it to go and get higher than a 4 for me is you have a guy like Hugo Weaving, and you literally, and his ability to do what he does with verbiage on screen,
mhm.
and you wasted all of that in the first 10 minutes of the movie and then just let it go.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a lot less eloquent
Right.
after the first two scenes or so.
Right. And I've noticed that more now in life than I did earlier. It's like, wow, you guys kind of got us all ramped up for this super intellectual dude, and it just kind of dissipated.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, and also something else that I did not mention as we were going through it was the breakdown of USA, as mentioned by Gordon when he was on screen, the
Mm,
ulcer sphincter arterica.
yeah.
And yeah, argue that if you want. But I thought that was, that was pretty spot on. And again, as I said at the top, realizing that this whole thing is set as something that is the outcome of something that began in America.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I enjoy this movie. I think it's pretty good. I like the overall sort of ideas that are in this movie. I like Natalie Portman. I think she's a terrific actress. I like Hugo Weaving, even though he doesn't really get to act that much here. Um, I think that the storyline and the atmosphere is good. I think that the writing is pretty decent, aside for some of the plot holes and the forgiveness you have to have about the situation with Evie and V. But I'm gonna give this a 3. I'm giving it a 3 because it's not one of my favorites. I do enjoy it, but I really want to reserve, the upper echelons of ratings for
Right,
like the ones I really, really love. So I have to give this one a 3. I think
right,
it's solid. I think it does a good job, doing what it needs to do. I think it's interesting. I think that it would probably be a better TV show.
It would have definitely been an amazing TV show.
Yeah, I think it would have been a lot better as a TV show. I think this sort of story needs a little bit more. Like I said, I think there needed to be more about the cruelty of the government. I really wanted to hate these people. I wanted to know that there was this had to happen. You know,
Right.
V had to blow this place up in order for these people to just be, completely wiped out. Like I
Right. Like, when
needed
was the next election? Why didn't we hear about that?
Right. But then that's my whole thing is like I needed to feel like the stakes were so high that it justified blowing up Parliament. And I just don't feel like they gave us enough aside from like stories of like how, they ban stuff and like I get that, but I think we need to see a lot more cruelty than, the black bagging of people. Like there are plenty of countries that do that right now without, like
I
so
thought it
that's
too, but you
yeah,
said it. Go ahead.
like that's not exactly the most extreme thing we've ever heard of before. So yeah, I would definitely give this a solid 3 for sure. So I think
So,
that puts it at a 7. That's not bad.
yeah, not bad at all. Are there any standout scenes or lines for you?
Not necessarily any lines, but this does bring up I have Ayla here from Exofathom. She gave us a little research. She said vivere veniversum vivus vici is a modern Latin phrase meaning by the power of truth I while living have conquered the universe.
That's right. I
Yeah.
like.
So that's a good line. I'll say that.
Nice. Yeah, as I said, I like that line as well. I didn't understand it. I guess I do understand it now after we discussed it, but I didn't understand its placement in the movie as far as the scene. But yeah,
Mhm.
so for me, that's definitely one of them. I just for some of my stay, I have a few. I think I have like 4. Some of them are just like whoa statements. Like, you said that.
Mhm.
Most people wouldn't have said that, but you said that. One of them is what usually happens when people without guns stand up to people with guns, and then he kind of like side eye looks at the guy like, "Ooh, oh,
Mhm.
that's what usually happens." Like, yeah, you know what happens. Um, the scene at the end where V is in the about to get into the showdown before he's fighting, and he says, "You're one man, and all you have is knives." That's what Creedy says to V, and V says, "No, what you have are bullets, in the hope that when your guns are empty, I'll be no longer standing, and if I am, you'll be dead before you can reload."
Mhm.
That even made me like, "Who? What, excuse me? Huh? What?" I remember the first time he said that, I was like, "Wait, you said what? You gonna do what?" I want to see it. I mean, I know this is a movie, so I know it's gonna happen, but explain. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, when she said "Guy is the rain," which I explained, it was just that personification of the rain, um, and the embodiment or the imbuement of a new spirit, a new soul, a strength that wasn't there before, a
Mhm.
rebirth. Contributing to that, like it was almost like a baptism. That's the word I didn't use earlier, but it almost seemed like for her it was a baptism.
Mhm.
But I liked that as the water hit her face, she has this statement. It was like her first sane statement in this new mindset: God is rain.
Yeah.
And the last one was what how Valerie ended her very last message. And I said a lot of them through, for the record, which is why I'm going to say this one last. I said a lot of them through, like the people should not be afraid of governments and all those kind of things. But my personal favorite was, and I believe I am I've used this in life for my wife. I believe, I could be wrong, but it goes, "Even though I do not know you," I mean, of course I know her, but you get me. We met before we knew. "But even though I do not know you, may never meet with you, laugh with you, cry with you, or kiss you, I love you."
Mhm.
Um, I don't want to explain how I switched that, but yeah, I know what I said. She
Yeah.
knows what I said.
Yeah.
But that statement can be manipulated in ways to mean what you need it to mean to the person you're talking to. And I'll say it again: even though I do not know you, may never meet with you, laugh with you, cry with you, or kiss you, I love you. I think every human being who knows what love actually feels like feels that way about every human being on this planet because we want each other to feel that feeling.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, just like what it feels to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. I look through things, I look back and I realize like, oh, that's how I was influenced on that. Okay, I get it. I get it. And for me, those were the top sayings.
Nice.
Again, to reference for those listening, I switch those words quite away, but it is the same sentiment, you know, whether I can, couldn't, will, or won't, I love you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I get it for sure, man. Well, cool. I think that wraps up the rundown for the Continuum 5 V for Vendetta. Nice.
Boot, boot, boot.
That is a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you. Go ahead and check us out on Facebook. We are streaming on Thinkering Talks, and then on YouTube, we have our own channel, Screen Time Continuum. Please give us a thumbs up. Consider following us and subscribing to us. It would really mean a lot to us. Please stay tuned for next week. We will be covering season 2 of Game of Thrones. That's going to be a lot of fun as well. Make sure on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. you are checking out Keelan's show, If Numbers Could Talk. Yes, and Monday and Fridays at 8 p.m. Exofathom. Other than that, Keelan, you got anything before we wrap up?
Nothing in particular, as I always say, and I truly mean it. Take care of yourself, take care of those you love. And in this new year, I just want to say, if I don't know you, if I'll never meet you, I still love you.
Amen. Very good. Yeah, and I think we'll wrap it up with that. So thank you very much, you guys. We very much appreciate you. Stay tuned. We will let you know what the next wormhole is going to be, but it will likely be Hugo Weaving because there are not many other actors in this one. So we'll let you know, but that'll be in the next couple weeks. Next week will be Game of Thrones season 2 review. Keelan saw it for the first time, and we are going to talk about it. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, you guys, we will catch you on the next time Screen Time Continuum. Good night.